Right, well, a few years ago, it was about 2016, was it? Yeah, 2016, 17. Yeah, it was 2016. I built the original bubbleator, the one with the really large coils. Well, actually, I'll show you the solid state one because I've still got that one. I dismantled the other one. This is the original design that I've made. You can see the size of it's massive. Well, this was the solid state version, but it was very similar to the actual, the concentric magnets are in there. They're very big magnets as well. And this is, I dismantled the original rotary system one, which went between the rotors, and you can see it's very big. It's my hand span across there. See how big it is, very big. Well, there was too many losses with it because it was too big. And the steel laminations, I had no ferrite in here whatsoever, no ferrite rings or anything. That was probably the mistake because really it needs to have ferrite rings. So going back to this one, on this particular one I've got laminations in the first section for the flux switch, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4 concentric magnets. Now I added the 5th concentric magnet to the middle, which is another array of 8 banks of north-south magnets, right? But the difference is with the newer one, which is this one, there was actually ferrite cores that run all the way through the secondary coil and the center concentric and the other secondary coil. So there's ferrites between here and here, but the steel laminations for the flux traps on each end. Now, since I added the center concentric, which I originally had on the version I built back in 2016, I actually gained 100 RPM. And I've got the same voltage and current. So basically, I've actually gained speed. I've reduced my losses. Because you remember when I was doing some tests earlier, I was down to about 500 RPM or 490 RPM because the amount of drag that was on the system was much greater. Now, the way I believe that this is working is simply the fact that because of the magnet switching, it is creating a delay, a reactive delay between the time that the flux switches through and because this side is pulling on this side and this side is pushing, then it alternates, and that side's pushing and this side's pulling. So it alternates backwards and forwards. So we've got a flux field switching through there. So that's obviously causing one thing. But the other thing is the fact that the equal opposite reaction, by the way, that never goes away. The equal opposite reaction, I heard somebody else talking on YouTube saying that the proven Newton's third law is wrong. But that's bullshit. I'm sorry, but it is. It's bullshit. Newton's third law always applies. It always applies. However, how you deal with the opposite reaction is the key. I mean, the equal opposite reaction, how you deal with that's the principle of how you can get something to work or not work. So if you have an opposite reaction, now you can have the opposite reaction coming up against the rotors to slow it down, or you can absorb that opposite reaction by a flux trap and divert that opposite reaction into a stationary status situation where it does not directly influence the rotors. And that's what I'm trying to do. I am not going against Newton's third law. Only a heretic would do that. I've heard people saying, oh, Newton's third law is rubbish, it doesn't apply. That's bullshit. Of course it applies. It always applies. It's how you deal with it. Now, you can ignore a problem, right? You can stick your nose up in the air and pretend that the sky is red, right? Doesn't mean to say it is red, right? So, okay. Anyway, the point is, unless you live on Mars, right? Anyway, the point is, we've got the same kind of voltages I had before. We have got more speed now, though. Now, let me take the load off a minute. Right, I've taken the load off. As you can see, we are gaining speed because we're still getting the opposite reaction, but it's not as significant as it was before. And the voltage is now on the coils climbing as the speed increases, and on both channels, we still have that strange noise in the waveform, which is kind of interesting. But anyway, the speed is increased now. We have gained speed, as you can see on the RPM meter, because there's actually less drag on the system. But we are still losing speed when I load it down, because you would expect that. It's proportional. Now, the question is, how much speed are we willing to accept of a loss? I mean, obviously, if you lose too much speed, then it's not going to generate any power. So, anyway, I just thought I'd better make this a little update, because, yeah, I've got things to do tomorrow. Anyway, the RPM is gain speed, okay? Now, at the moment, the voltages on the output are now at 19.8 peak to peak, 20.2 peak to peak. Cyclic is 6.40 on one output, 6.40 on the other output. Well, that will be the same, because both coils are, both secondary coils, well, both sets of secondary coils, that's these two at the top and these two at the bottom, all have 1,000 turns, right? Except that the top set is 36 SWG wire, and the bottom set is 38 SWG wire. I wanted to try both, that's why there's less wire on there. It appears to be less wire, but it's the same number of turns. Anyway, so let me put the load back on, and we will see it slow down, which is what you would expect. There we go, it's slowing down now, but it's not slowing down as much, that's the main thing. So anyway, as I say, I've gained generally, I've gained about 1,000 RPM, either under load or not under load, so there's less drag than there was. But at the moment, I am actually driving at a bit higher current anyway, so I mean, we're about 160 milliamps or something like that at the moment on the input side of it. Actually, I think it's 150 milliamps, but yeah, so, but the meter, this meter here, this thing uses about 30 or 40, I thought it's 50, I think it's 30 or 40 milliamps, but that seems to fluctuate as well, because obviously it depends on what voltage you're putting into it, because these LEDs will get slightly brighter, I think, if you put more voltage in. But yeah, we're at about the same values. I mean, I did have to change some of my settings on my input power supply, simply because I was trying the solid state version the other day and had to turn the voltage up for that thing. But yeah, that's the current voltage, sorry, current going in right now. Voltage is about, what's the voltage? Voltage is about 9 volts. So, oh no, it's not, what are we? Yeah, 9 volts, that's 9 volts. So 9 and a bit volts. So we're about the same voltage, yeah. We're about the same voltage as we were previously, and that's the current. The current's at the bottom and the voltage at the top. Anyway, so I'm waffling a bit, and but the next stage really is to try to control the device with some triacs and basically switch in and out the secondary output coils when the start of the cycle and end of the cycle begins. So anyway, that's it for now. Okay, right, I thought maybe I should make a follow-up video, because it just really gets up my goat. It really pisses me off when, sorry, excuse my language, but you hear it all the time. There are people on YouTube who make videos about free energy and magnetism and everything, and they say that they can basically prove that Newton's third law is wrong, or that they can basically replace Newton's third law with some other law of their own, which they don't tell us what it is. Well, I say bullshit, right? And I explain why. You cannot write off somebody else's mathematics because you think you've found a way to prove him wrong. That's not the way it works. I'll explain it simply, right? Right, this is a tennis racket, okay? I drew a tennis racket. There's a ball, right? The ball has been thrown, and there's a certain amount of energy behind that ball. You cannot destroy energy. Energy can be converted. You can convert energy from one form to another, but that energy will always exist. So when the ball hits the racket, now this is where it gets interesting. If the racket is at an angle, let's just draw the top view of a racket. Right, this is the top view of a racket, right, looking down on it. There's the ball. Right, the ball is directly at the racket, travelling directly at it. Now, that racket will absorb exactly the same amount of force that it took to throw the ball, minus the amount of deceleration it accumulated while it was travelling through the air or water for that matter. So the water, if there's water between the ball and the racket, the water will absorb some of that force, but the water will still have an opposite reaction to the ball, and the racket will have an opposite reaction to whatever energy is left in the ball when it arrives at the racket, right? Now, if you put the racket at a 45-degree angle, and the ball is over here, and the ball is travelling in a straight line, right? Now, the forces are now divided. Can you see how the forces are divided? Right, the forces are divided between this direction and this direction. Why is that? Because the ball is hitting the racket at an angle, it's going to push the racket in this direction slightly, and it's also going to push the racket in this direction slightly. So we have a direction proportional of that direction. So if you've ever played tennis, you'll know what I'm talking about. When you hit the ball with the racket, it's not straight, it will twist in your hand because the forces are being deflected at an angle. Right, now I've explained this, and don't forget, if there's water between the ball, right, water, then the water will absorb some of that energy. So there'll be less energy by the time it reaches the racket. But we're usually using air, but there's still air friction, so the air will slow the ball down. Okay, why am I talking about water and air? Right, we'll translate that into inductance, because there's a certain amount of time for a material or an iron core or a ferrite core to react to an energetic force that's being imposed upon it. And that force, if you've ever messed around with transformers and inductance, you'll know that an inductor works in the opposite way to a capacitor. An inductance will begin at a high resistance and it will fall to a low resistance, whereas a capacitor will begin at a low resistance and climb to a high resistance as it's charged, while an inductor will do the opposite. So there are ways of delaying reactive forces, but the forces will always exist. You can deflect them, you can screen them so that the forces will go around an object, just like the deflection of the ball, but the forces will always exist. So anyone that says Newton's third law is poppycock, you're a heretic, basically. I mean, that's heresy. So my device, what I'm trying to do with it is I'm experimenting ways of redirecting forces. I'll explain that. Right, two concentric magnets. One has 8 poles, and the top pole will be, say south, pointing inwards, and the next one will be north, then south, then north, then south, then north, and south, and north. Right. The 4-pole concentric is north, south, north, south. Now, when an energetic force, such as a rotor with a magnet in it, passes the end of this ferrite, what's happening? Right, the rotor magnet, let's say, is south. Well, the south field is going to be drawn and it's going to pull on the north polarization of the magnets on each side. This is a simplified version. But at the same time, it's going to deflect the south. So we have an equilibrium, we have balance. We have an equal and opposite reaction, but it's working in our favour. Why? Because on the other side, there is no longer a north field coming out of the ferrite, it's just south. However, the rotor is seeing both of those fields. However, if we have a coil on this side, and that coil is absorbing the energy from the flux from this core, it's going to push back anyway. So that equal opposite reaction still applies. But we have a little air gap. We have what I would call a little bit of leniency in the way that we have created a bit of a delay, because it takes quite a considerable amount more of opposite reaction to get through here and back to the rotor. That is why my concentric assembly uses two concentric assemblies on the outside. So on the outside here, there's two pink concentrics and they're both 8-pole, and then there's a coil in the middle, and that's my magnetic trap. So what happens is the flux on the rotor, I'm losing an enormous amount of flux from this rotor magnet. The magnets in here are very powerful, the neodymium N52s. The amount of energy that's required to get through here is quite a lot, but we only get a small amount on this side. But that sacrifice of that amount of flux that we've lost is beneficial, because we might have lost that flux, but we haven't lost the speed. We haven't lost the amount of energy that we're putting in to spin the rotor. So the rotor, we're effectively putting less energy in to rotate the rotor, even though the magnets themselves, there's massive amounts of loss. So the object is to minimize the amount of drag, right, to optimize the maximum amount of energy that we can actually get out of the secondary coils, right? So in theory, if we can minimize the drag, we can have another 4 sets of these. So we have 1, 2 at the moment, 3, 4. So we could have every 8 sets. And if we can have 8 sets of coils, and we still have the same RPM, and we still have the same amount of power going in to drive the rotors, then at some point we will achieve over-unity. However, over-unity will always come at a cost. So there may be a situation where this device just doesn't work properly, and the more I add, the more increase on input current it takes to drive it. That is the problem. That is what I'm working on, how to solve. So I hope that explains it. But like I explained before, Newton's law stands, and it will always stand. It's how you deflect those forces that are coming in. If you can deflect them to another medium. So at the moment, what I'm doing is deflecting them by absorbing them by the opposite polarization on the concentric. So south coming in subtracts north and expels south. So I think you understand that, because that's equilibrium. We get to a point when I put a magnet near this assembly, magnets, when I put it to a certain distance where I feel no force, I feel nothing there until I get to too close, and then it starts to pull to the ferrite. But in between, there's an area where there's no force felt, and that is what I'm capitalising on, or hoping to capitalise on, because it's that is stuck to the outside magnet on there at the moment. It's that I'm hoping will give me the advantage. But yeah, it's all about theory. There is nothing proven. Thank you for watching.